The 2024 fantasy football season has come to a close, and because we are sick degenerates, we are going to project next year's fantasy football drafts. We're going to go as many rounds as we can without yapping too long, maybe 2 rounds, maybe 3 rounds. And we're just going to go through kind of what we think next year's fantasy drafts will look like. This is anecdotal for the most part, but it could have dynasty implications for those of you guys looking to buy players for next year's production or whatever the case is. Maybe sell high on players that had big seasons this year. Should be fun. I'm going to be picking from odds. Danny's going to be picking from evens. We're going to go back and forth, and we are going to include Ashton Jeanty and any other rookies in this top 2 to 3 round projection here. So I'm sure we'll call his name at some point. We're going to have to do a little bit of projecting as far as which team he gets drafted by, but it should be a fun exercise nonetheless. So Danny, I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to go with the 101. To me, it would depend on the scoring format. Are you in a half PPR, a standard, a full PPR, best ball, redraft, whatever? For me, I think in most of the formats that you and I play in, which is, mostly redrafts, PPR leagues, or best ball type of formats, Jahmyr Chase will end up being the 101, given the fact that he had a monster season this year, triple crown wide receiver this year, led the league in receptions, led the league in yards, led the league in touchdowns. Joe Burrow, of course, having historical, 42, 43 touchdowns or whatever that he's already thrown with yet a game to go. Jahmyr Chase is just a crystal clear projection. We were drafting this guy 2 years ago as the 102 because he had such a crystal clear projection. Got a little mini discount on him last year because he was banged up. Joe Burrow was banged up in 2023. And then this year they both stay healthy and they make magic together.
Well, the season that Jahmyr Chase just had really reminds me in terms of just the points per game equity that he brings to the table as a season that we saw last year from CeeDee Lamb. And CeeDee Lamb last year, if you guys recall, was my 101 in drafts. With Jahmyr Chase, it's pretty simple. Like you said, he's got the triple crown, over 1,600 yards, 117 receptions, 16 receiving touchdowns. In a down year for receivers overall, Jahmyr Chase was as big of an advantage as any other player is relative to the rest of their position, including Brock Bowers, including, Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson at the quarterback position, including who we'll probably be talking about within the next couple of picks, Saquon Barkley at the running back position. Yeah, there's no real holes in Jahmyr Chase's game. He's in his prime, 24 years old. And although you would most likely prefer T. Higgins to be back to increase the overall validity of this offense, we could see a scenario where this guy has been thriving off of about 10 targets per game. Could you imagine a scenario where he's in a Malik Nabers spot and he's averaging 11.6, 11.7? There is still more meat left on the bone if T. Higgins were to leave in free agency.
Well, yeah, and what did we always say about Jahmyr Chase last year and the year before? It's like the nuts scenario for Jahmyr Chase is that he runs hot on touchdowns because Joe Burrow threw 45 or 50 of them. And that could happen again next year. That could happen again 2 years from now. And if T. Higgins is gone, that's going to open up, by the way, the second best scoring fantasy wide receiver in fantasy on a points per game basis was T. Higgins. So Chase and Higgins paced Jefferson and St. Brown and Nabers and Nacua and Lamb and Collins and all these guys. Higgins outscored all of them.
Yeah. No, Higgins was an absolute beast. I mean, when you have a quarterback playing the way Burrow was this year, when you have a defense in particular, I think that's the other thing. We always talk about the offensive projections. The sheer volume of offensive plays we saw in Cincinnati with how bad their defense was this year, it's almost like we hear that narrative every year, like, a bad defense means the offense is going to be on the field. No, that was actually the case in Cincinnati this year.
Yeah, we don't always run pure on good offense meets bad defense on the same team. But like in 2019 with my Buccaneers, that was the case, for example. And Jameis threw 30 touchdowns, 30 interceptions, of course. But sometimes you do get these magical seasons. I remember in 2020, Deshaun Watson and the Houston Texans had a horrible defense, and Watson had to play catch up every single game, and it led to him being a 25 or 23 point per game scoring quarterback. Sometimes that just happens, and Will Fuller ended up being a wide receiver 1 that year as a result. So it's something that maybe doesn't happen again this year with maybe the Bengals making some additions, firing their DC, whatever they end up doing. But at the same time, Jahmyr Chase is a crystal clear projection at 101. Who are you rolling with here at 102?
So I think this is a debate between 2 separate guys for me, both playing at the running back position. On one hand, I got to give my flowers to Saquon Barkley, over 2,000 rushing yards. If he plays in week 18, again, we don't confirm that right now, has a really good chance to break that Eric Dickerson record. Again, no shade towards him, but at the same time, man, I got a running back in year 2 who, since week 6, has averaged 21.8 PPR points per game. I'm taking Bijan Robinson. Now, obviously, there's going to be people going in the comments already. How could you not take Saquon Barkley? And it's like, Saquon Barkley is going to be a top 3 pick. This is no shade towards Saquon Barkley. This is all giving flowers to Bijan Robinson. You're getting in his prime running back, who I think everyone at this point would argue is a top 3 running back talent in the league, behind a good run scheme in Atlanta, a good run offensive line with receiving volume. And on top of that, again, you are also avoiding the risk that an older running back would bring to the table in Saquon versus Bijan Robinson. Again, not to say, Saquon's old, therefore I'm fading him. That is more so when I'm going through tiebreakers, I want the younger in his prime running back. And again, Saquon Barkley did outscore him this year, but 21.8 PPR points per game for a year 2 running back. He takes another step in year 3. We could be looking at a legendary level upside here. So with Bijan Robinson, I know he's going to be having a 24, 25 point per game Saquon Barkley level season soon. I just don't want to be the one missing out on it.
Yeah, I think the first round, one thing I've learned this year is that the first round really comes down to what guy did you catch lightning in a bottle on? And like Saquon, if you got him at the end of the first round, was this year lightning in the bottle running back. Did you catch lightning in the bottle on Ja'Marr Chase this year? Did you catch lightning in the bottle on Jahmyr Gibbs in the late first round area? All these guys project very well. They're all going to have upside cases. They're all superstar talents. The guy that projects the best, and also we can see a path for him taking another step forward, is really what you're aiming for here. And I mean, there was a stretch of games where Kirk Cousins was awful and Bijan was still producing. There was a stretch of games at the beginning of the season, weeks 1 to 5 specifically, where Algier was a lot more involved than we wanted him to be. And many people were panicking on Bijan. People were saying, hey, we got to have the conversation. Is Bijan an RB2 the rest of the year? And then in week 6, we screamed from the mountaintops to buy Bijan Robinson. And since then, like you said, he's been basically a legendary running back. Only having 2 games under 20 points this in that stretch of game. Like he's been dominant. So for me, it's like you have the youth, you have Penix, who's already looked pretty good so far. We know Kirk Cousins is going to be gone next year. This offense is going to be a lot better in year 2, hopefully with Zach Robinson, and Bijan is in a year 3 running back. He's only 23 years old. He's still getting better as a player.
Yeah, and that's also part of it too. I mean, for the Eagles front, obviously Saquon Barkley had this legendary season this year, and I very well think he could be a 20 plus, 22 plus point per game back next year. But also, what's the situation if both Devontae Smith and AJ Brown stay healthy across the year? Dallas Goedert stays healthy across the year. Maybe instead of a 25 to 28 pass attempt per game type of team, we see them go back closer to the 30 attempt mark. Again, I feel like there's more risk in that situation because of how much went Saquon Barkley's way this year, that I would rather take the stab on Bijan Robinson, knowing he's a 22-year-old running back going into year 3.
Yeah, again, we're not going to hold age against some of these guys too hard.
He's going to go right here.
When you're talking tiebreakers of 102 versus 103, It makes some sense. And there is some temptation for me to take Justin Jefferson here because Justin Jefferson proved me very stupid this year with me fading him all the way down to, I think I had him at 108 going into the year because of where I thought, Jefferson and the Sam Darnold experience would go. And there's a little bit of question mark still with the quarterback situation going into next year for Minnesota, because it could be year 1 of a second-year quarterback who didn't play at all his rookie season, or we could have Sam Darnold back yet again. And honestly, if that were the case, I think Jefferson probably would be the 103 or the 102 potentially.
Make the decision right now. Which scenario are we playing it is? Sam Darnold is back next year, signs a 4-year, $200 to $220 million contract, or he is off the team and we have JJ McCarthy quarterback. Play an exact scenario here for the viewers.
So I've been, and I talked about this on our live stream yesterday, I think that Darnold will get franchise tagged and will be the starting quarterback somewhere, potentially in Minnesota yet again. They could go the Jordan Love route of sitting him for 2 years. So with that in mind, I am going to take Justin Jefferson over Saquon Barkley because I think Darnold will be the quarterback next year. It's really hard to walk away from what he's done so far this season and just be like, yeah, well, we took this guy 10th overall. We're going to use him. I think that's the long-term plan, but I think franchise tagging Sam Darnold at the very least, maybe extending him for a 2-year deal or something like that, makes a lot of sense from Minnesota's perspective. It does not make business sense to let a guy walk who just had 35 touchdowns or whatever Sam Darnold has right now and just get a 3rd-round compensatory pick for him. At the very least, they should franchise tag him, try and trade him, maybe use him for 1 more year, whatever the case is. So for me, if Jefferson's got Darnold back for 1 more year, he's got to be the 103 or the 102.
Yeah, I mean, he would be a little bit lower on my own board specifically because there's 2 names in particular, which I'm sure those at home can take a guess on. But I mean, regardless, there is no going wrong for a 19 PPR point per game Justin Jefferson on what has been the standout offense in the league this year. People had expectations that Minnesota, would be a frisky team, would probably be, I mean, for example, how Tampa is, a 10-win type of team, very good, strong offense. nobody and their mother could have expected a 14-2 Vikings team at this point. And having Justin Jefferson, obviously a top 2, top 3 overall wide receiver in the league. Again, I would argue top 1. I think he is the best wide receiver, but because of what Chase has done, because of a couple other guys, top 2, top 3 at the very minimum. Because of what you have with him, because of what you have with the support around him, obviously with Kevin O'Connell dialing up shots, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkins providing some support, ancillary support in this offense. This thing is a full iron juggernaut, and we have seen Justin Jefferson's touchdown equity, specifically in the last few weeks, really come back. Justin Jefferson went through a stretch this year where he didn't score in 6 weeks, right? Yeah. And then he scored 5 touchdowns in his last 4 games. So that shows you that even though he had a little bit of a dry spell, if Sam Darnold's going to be throwing 35-plus touchdowns here next year, you got to drop Justin Jefferson very high.
Yeah, and again, I worry a little bit that Jefferson was maybe the lightning in a bottle pick this year where you didn't think, like you just said, the Vikings were expected to be a frisky team. Their over-under for wins going into the season was 6.5. People thought they would be objectively a bad team. And they were not only, like, they could be the number 1 seed in the conference after next week's game if they beat Detroit. So I do think it was a little bit lightning in a bottle. Maybe it's McCarthy next year. Maybe it's Sam Darnold having a worse season. I think there's outs that the concern I had, specifically not you, I had this concern going into the season for Justin Jefferson, rears its head a little bit more next year than it did this year. And the quarterback play maybe struggles a little bit more. But regardless, I'm never doubting Justin Jefferson again.
Yeah, no, I think you pretty much summed it up. I'm back on the clock here at the 104. And I want to sit here and take my Dallas Cowboy, but I would be doing y'all a disservice because Saquon Barkley, with the season he just had, rushing for over 2,000 yards, if he falls to 104 in your drafts, you take Saquon Barkley. It's pretty simple. You have the best offensive line coach in the league with Jeff Stoutland. You have the best performing offensive line in the league. You have Saquon Barkley, who is a generational talent. And you have a team that wants to run the piss out of the football. On top of that, who are probably going to win 12 to 13 plus wins again next year. There's just, other than age and other than prior injury in the past that we've seen, there are no holes in the Saquon Barkley fantasy football projection. Again, I would prefer Bijan because I think there's more meat left on the bone for him to potentially hit 25 points per game. But Saquon Barkley just did that. So it's like, if you're fading him past the 104, you literally have evidence that this guy can break fantasy football. Look what he did this year.
Yeah, exactly. Again, sometimes people like to make the claim like, oh, whoever was the 101 last year is never the one. Like, they always get injured or they always have a bad season. Like, some people like to gutalytics their way into thinking that any one of Saquon or Jahmyr Chase shouldn't be the 101 next year because they were the lightning in the bottle seasons this year. But at the same time, like, the projection's going to be still really good. Like you said, like, dude, you could make the argument that Saquon Barkley ran cold on touchdowns this year because there was a number of 1 yard line tackles. And, you know, I remember specifically when I was trying to advance out of a Best Ball Mania pod in week 15, he had 2 carries inside the 3 yard line, didn't get into the end zone against Carolina. And then, of course, Jalen Hurts pushes his way into the end zone on the next play. So there's still going to be push concerns. There's still going to be pass catching upside concerns because of all the receivers that they have there. But it didn't matter this year, and I don't really think it's going to matter much next year. Could he have only 1,500 rushing yards next year and average 4.2 yards per carry in a bit more of a down efficiency season? Definitely, but you're still going to take that at the 104.
I'll tell you right now, if he went from 5.81 to 4.2 yards per carry, like, you would need 4 injuries on that offensive line.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's exactly what's going to have to happen there. So 104, Saquon Barkley. Am I on the clock? Yeah, I'm on the clock here. Okay, so I got to make a decision here between some of the other running backs potentially. So for what it's worth, if Ashton Jeanty goes to the Dallas Cowboys, he might find his way this high in the rankings. He might literally go this high in the draft. We're going to project Jeanty a little bit more conservatively just because there's a couple different landing spots.
8th overall to the Raiders. You want to say that? 8th overall?
Yeah, I mean, 8th overall to the Raiders. He could go 10th overall to the Saints. He could go 13th to the Cowboys, of course, would be kind of the nutted landing spot. He could go 16th to the Bengals. He could go 19th to the Texans. He could go 20th to the Broncos. There's a number of different spots that he could go. Let's just pretend for ease sake that he went to like a median projection landing spot instead of the nuts that would be the Cowboys. So I'm going to be on the clock here, and I'm not going to go with Jeanty. I'm either going to go probably wide receiver route. There's a big cluster of wide receivers that all project extremely, extremely well. I have long been of the opinion that Amon-Ra St. Brown is very underrated. He is very, very tempting here. Danny is going to have a conniption if I don't take CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins, or Puka Nacua, who are all Danny's favorite players on the planet Earth.
I love those guys.
Let me just break these guys all down because I think there's going to be a string of all of them going in a row here. So for me, you look at St. Brown, does he have any cons? To me, the answer is no. The pros are Lions are elite. Jared Goff plays at a high level. A super well-coached team. Yes, there's target competition with Jameson Williams and Sam Laporta, but it hasn't really mattered to this point with St. Brown. With CeeDee Lamb, are there any cons? Not really. The Dak Prescott, as long as he stays healthy, CeeDee Lamb, as long as he stays healthy, is going to be really good. This is the reason that he was like 101, 102 going into the season, and he just kind of had the Ja'Marr Chase season where both him and his quarterback dealt with injury, and he could very well bounce back. Collins, I have a little bit more concerns about because of how bad CJ Stroud played at some points this year. Dell's probably not going to be back on the field very early on in the season. Diggs maybe not either. So that's a great, bullish.
You would have to hope for, as much as I love Nico, you would have to hope for him basically to take that step up in terms of targets. Because again, very efficient on his targets this year overall. But like, can he get up to, CeeDee Lamb? He's averaging 10 targets per game at that size, that speed on the X. Like that's what you would need if CJ Stroud doesn't return to that top 5 to 10 level quarterback that he was going into the year.
Yeah, and with Nacua too, you can argue like you look at game splits, you look at what he's able to do when he's on the field. Like you could make the argument he belongs over all of these guys.
Cup gets traded.
Yeah, like there's an argument to be made that he belongs over all of these guys. For me, the safest combination of factors is St. Brown. So I'm going to take St. Brown here. I know Danny's going to be really mad about that. If it makes you sleep at night, put St. Brown with the next pick and take CeeDee Lamb. It's realistically, these guys are going to be very close projections.
I like St. Brown a lot. I'm telling you right now, CeeDee Lamb down the stretch after the bye, with Cooper Rush starting every game since week 9, averaged 18 points per game since the bye. He had 1,200 yards with Cooper Rush playing half the season. And obviously he's going to be my pick here, so you can just put him in there. CeeDee Lamb, it almost feels like people forget just how much of an advantage he was 2 years ago. He, on a point per game basis 2 years ago, averaged more points per game than what Ja'Marr Chase is averaging right now.
I'm glad you're bringing up that 2 years ago is still relevant, because when we get to Tyreek Hill, I will make the exact same argument.
Go ahead. So, I think it's very much more applicable for a 25 in his prime wide receiver with his quarterback coming back than what it is with Tyreek Hill, because I don't have any concerns about CeeDee Lamb being any lesser of a player that went 135 for 1749 and 12 touchdowns 2 years ago. I have a lot more concerns with Tyreek Hill, which we'll touch upon later in the mock draft. But I'm going to say it right now. If CeeDee Lamb is the 106 in your drafts, that is a generational wealth opportunity. Because like I said, he averaged almost 24 points per game 2 years ago. And this was a guy that was my 101 last year, had his quarterback go down, and finished as the wide receiver 5 in fantasy. How many wide receivers in the NFL can have their quarterback go down and finish as a top 5 option?
Yeah, no, like you said, if you have the floor that Lamb showed this year, you're going to still find yourself very, very highly on in drafts. And if you recall in the Dynasty Cornerstone rankings, what I talked about with Breece Hall was sometimes you're not going to get these wide receiver 1 every single season type of productions. You're going to get fluctuations where it's like, Lamb was wide receiver 1 in 2023. I dropped to wide receiver 5 and 17.6 points per game on the season in 2024 because Dak got hurt and Lamb was dealing with a shoulder injury. But then back in 2025, he's back up to wide receiver 2 in fantasy or whatever. That's what you're going to see most of the time. So I could have very easily gone with Lamb 105. You could very easily have done that. You could even potentially convince me over Barkley that you would go with Lamb.
I almost did. Now, again, I didn't want to have to deal with that in the comments. And again, I also want to give Barkley his flowers for how good he was this year, but that was a real conversation. I was at the 104 thinking, like, do I take Lamb? And in fact, when you took Jefferson, that's who I was implying. I'm like, getting to my head right now, I'm taking Lamb.
Yeah, I mean, if I knew Darnold was back, I would take Jefferson. But if it was McCarthy and Jefferson teaming up for the first time, and Darnold's on the Raiders or something like that, you could make the argument that it's Lamb. I think the point is so far at least,
all these guys are studs.
The first round is a lot closer than it was last year. Like I think clearly the projections of Lamb, Hill, and McCaffrey were like better slightly than like the next group of guys. And then those like 5 players were better than like the 109 to 112 guys. I think it's a little bit more fluid at the top this year, at least so far from what we've seen. So I'm back on the clock. I could go with a number of different guys here. Like I
I know
said,
where you're going.
Nacua, Nico Collins. Who is RB3? Achane? Is it Gibbs? Is it Henry? Is it, Jeanty, like we talked about, could definitely find his way in here. Who's RB3 right now for you? I'm probably not going to go with RB3 yet, but who's RB3 right now?
I think it's got to be Gibbs. Now, I agree with what you said that RB3 probably doesn't go in the next few picks. Probably starts getting on the convo closer to the 109 area. But the thing with Jahmyr Gibbs is, like we've seen, he is a mid-end RB1 projection when David Montgomery is healthy. He is the single best fantasy football running back anytime that David Montgomery's out of the lineup. So having a guy that from a floor standpoint, if he stays healthy, given the attachment to that offense, given the explosive nature, again, I've comped him to our generation's Jamal Charles. Given that overall talent level with that offense, he's going to be a mid RB1 projection. The only concern, obviously, would be the volume. And David Montgomery, we've seen since the torn MCL, Jahmyr Gibbs be the clear-cut RB1 in fantasy.
You've convinced me, Danny. I'm going to go with Jahmyr Gibbs here.
I mess with it.
I have more, I don't have many questions about Collins and Nacua, but there's enough questions that I would go with Gibbs over him. He's just such a locked and loaded, crystal clear projection to be a mid-end RB1 and elite league winner if anything happens to David Montgomery. To the point that you gotta just roll with these Lions, man. They're just such easy projections. And Collins, Stroud had a little bit of a down season. Puka Nacua, what if Cooper Kupp is back? That could affect his target share a little bit. I mean, it didn't really this year, so you could make the argument that Nacua should be off the board already. But I'm sure you're probably going to go with Nacua here. Maybe you go with Collins or something like that.
Yeah, it'd be between those two. Now, when you're comparing these two, so Nico, obviously there is some context. You take away his 47% snap game. You take away his 13% snap game. You're looking at about a guy who averaged 20 points per game. So the fact that we're talking about 20 point per game scores, both Nacua and Nico being available at the 108, 109, just kind of paints the picture for how loaded the top of the board is this year. I think you can go with either or. Again, I will go with Nacua, because I feel more comfortable in his role in his offense in terms of generating some easy production. Again, Nico Collins, no questions with the player. I think Nico Collins is a top 3 to 5 NFL wide receiver. But because he plays that X wide receiver role, he's more dependent on great quarterback play. With Puka Nacua, we have seen games where Stafford has thrown the ball for under 200 yards, but because Puka Nacua's role is so constant, obviously Sean McVay doing a great job getting him in motion, getting him across the line of scrimmage, getting him the ball in space. We know Puka Nacua. I mean, if I were to comp anybody for Puka Nacua, it would almost be like what we saw from Larry Fitzgerald at the end of his career, where he was just, again, not a burner, but strong hands, great in contested situations, good after the catch. Obviously, if you guys do remember that playoff game that he had against the Green Bay Packers, I believe, 2015, that is like the type of comparison I think of when I think of Puka Nacua. Now, there's also more meat left on the bone. If Cooper Kupp gets dealt this offseason, who knows what's going to happen there? Is he going to be a Ram? Is he going to be dealt? Regardless, though, even if Cooper Kupp is back, we have seen Puka Nacua be a legitimate 20-plus PPR point per game scorer this year when on the field. And at this point, getting that type of projection at 108 feels like a steal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel really good about Nacua. I think with him and St. Brown, one thing that we never think about during draft season that we always think about during the fantasy football season is shadow matchups and number one corners and stuff. And you never have to worry about that with St. Brown or Nacua because of how they're used and how they're deployed. So feel pretty good about both of those guys. I'll fall on the Nico sword here because I mean, I feel like he should just be off the board already. So I'll go with Nico, even though, again, depending on your scoring format, depending on how you like to build out your teams, we have no context of how the rest of the draft looks. Like if we get to August and we're like, oh my God, the 4th and 5th round are loaded with wide receiver options, maybe it makes sense to grab a hero running back strategy, or maybe it makes sense to grab running backs early. Then maybe you go with Achane here, or maybe you go with, Derrick Henry here, or maybe you go with Jacobs here, whatever running back you think belongs here. I'm just going to go with Collins because, like you said, I think the Texans offense should be better. At least Stroud should be better next year than he's posted this year because we saw what he did as a rookie, and maybe he's just having a bit of a sophomore slump. Collins, like you said, 20 points per game anytime he was on the field. It's a pretty cut and dry, easy projection, especially knowing that Diggs and Tank Dell are coming off of significant injuries going into next year.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, after the Collins, I do think there is a little bit of a tier break to the rest of it. Again, very good options, but also we know these top 9 guys are superstars in great situations. And with Nico Collins, it could be a better situation, don't get me wrong, if CJ Stroud bounces back. But I still think it's a really good situation regardless, because we know he's an alpha. We know Diggs and Dell are more than likely going to be off. Not Dell being off the team, of course, because obviously he's going to be recovering. But Diggs is going to be off the team. Dell's most likely going to miss the entire 2025 year. The realistic biggest target competition that Nico Collins is going to have is what? A first round of Emeka Egbuka. How else are they going to supplement wide receiver production other than Nico?
Yeah, they probably draft somebody or sign somebody in free agency, or maybe they draft a tight end potentially too. They might not even draft a wide receiver. But yeah, more or less, it's going to be Collins' show, and everybody else falls behind him.
Yeah, and I feel great being able to do this because we just took Nico Collins. I'm going to be taking baby Nico here, and you know exactly what I'm referring to. Put him on the board.
You're going to take Brian Thomas.
Brian Thomas Jr., the guy who had, listen to this, 3 wide receivers in fantasy finished with more fantasy points than Brian Thomas Jr. this year. Ja'Marr Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, all of them being off the board. Brian Thomas Jr., let's go through this, had 1,179 yards and 10 receiving touchdowns as a rookie wide receiver with Mac Jones starting since the bye. And people may argue, well, he was better with Mac Jones than he was with Trevor Lawrence. I would also argue that down the stretch with Trevor Lawrence, both of them were playing extremely banged up. Brian Thomas Jr. was banged up. We obviously know Trevor Lawrence got put on IR. The meat left on the bone for Brian Thomas Jr., we're talking about a 6'3", 210-pound wide receiver with 4.3 speed. Again, I compared him to Baby Nico, and maybe calling him Baby Nico is a disservice to Brian Thomas Jr. because I already think he's a top 10 level wide receiver in the league.
So this is not me saying this. I'm going to be the voice of the comment section for 1 second here. What would you say to the fact that Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram were both out for a vast majority of that time?
I would say that alphas earn theirs, and the rest of the ancillary production can go to those type of guys.
I agree. And I think I will say, though, I think Kirk is a good enough target earner and Ingram is a good enough target earner that you're not going to see probably like 30% target share Brian Thomas Jr., but he's so good. And he's so good. Like, and I will like somebody went back, I noticed, and watched the Brian Thomas tail of the tape that I did and commented, hey, like you were spot on a lot of this stuff. And if you guys recall, I was a little lower than Danny on Brian Thomas because I said, there's some development that needs to happen here. He's not quite refined to the level that you want him to be. It took him one NFL training camp to learn what he needed to learn. And sometimes that's what happens when you're a 20-year-old who has 17 touchdowns in the SEC alongside Malik Nabers. Yeah. You've already shown the ability that you can get better by the fact that you were a 5-star recruit coming out of high school or a 4-star recruit coming out of high school, and you eventually got better throughout your college ranks. And then you go into the NFL as a very, very young player still and get better immediately because you're still very young and you're still learning. And we didn't hear a lot of buzz about Brian Thomas in training camp. People said, oh, he's just a professional. He knows how to work or whatever like that. He doesn't ask questions or whatever. What was the report that came out about B-Tom in training camp that he like wasn't talking or something? There was a report that came out that he wasn't vocal or something like that. And people were like, oh no, like what if he's like Quentin Johnston? It's like, I had concerns about Brian Thomas, the prospect, but he started to remedy those concerns even throughout the preseason. And from what I knew about him, the prospect, I was hoping that he would take the steps needed to get better. And he very, very clearly did that.
So adding the context, right? Obviously, you guys, if you recall going into the last offseason, know how high I was on Nico Collins. And the biggest remark back was, well, how can you trust Nico as an alpha? Because they have Tank Dell and they have Stephon Diggs. Nico Collins in 2023, 109 targets, 80 receptions, 1,297 receiving yards, 8 receiving touchdowns, 261.4 PPR points in 15 games. Brian Thomas Jr. in 2024, 80 receptions, 1,179 receiving yards, 10 receiving touchdowns, 122 targets in 16 games, 266.7 points, PPR points. It is almost an identical profile, except I feel better at this point about the target competition in Jacksonville than I did about Houston last year.
Yeah. And like, we don't feel good about Doug Peterson at all. Like they get a better offensive mind in there. Trevor Lawrence starts playing better. The touchdown ceiling is really the scary part of what Thomas can do because we saw him score 17 in the SEC his final year at LSU. And he scored a lot this year on big plays and red zone touches and stuff like that. So yeah, I probably wouldn't take Thomas over the guy that I'm going to take, but he would have been my very next pick after that. So I don't disagree with you there. And I'm going to go with Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. I you might hear this throughout the video here. I think, call me crazy, Mike McDaniel's still a good coach. I don't know. Maybe people think that he should be fired. I've heard people say, like, is Mike McDaniel on the hot seat? I'm like, dude, I would, like, if I was one of these like Jacksonville, Chicago teams, I would hire Mike McDaniel in 2.2 seconds if he was fired by Miami.
If he wants to go back to being an OC, there's a nice little opening in Dallas. I'll tell you that.
I mean, you should fire McCarthy, first of all. But second of all, Devon Achane didn't have a good season this year from like a rushing efficiency standpoint after having like an historic rushing efficiency season. We actually didn't see very many long touchdowns from Achane this year. We saw one in week 17, which a lot of people probably appreciated in their championship game. But for the most part, we didn't see that rookie season Devon Achane break off those long runs, be super, super efficient. But all that matters is that when Tua Tagovailoa was on the field, this guy was basically a 20-point per game scorer. He had 2 monster games to start the season, was kind of bad for a while there when Tua was out. And then as soon as Tua was back on the field, this guy was producing virtually 20 points per game. So Achane, maybe this is too low. Again, if you wanted to go running back heavy, you could probably talk me into taking him as high as like 106, 107.
Yeah, I don't disagree. So with Devon Achane, especially if you're in a PPR league, he obviously has a bigger advantage at running back here because we did see a shift in his usage from year one. Obviously in year one of the historic efficiency seasons at the running back position, 7.77 yards per carry, 8 rushing touchdowns, like you said, pulling big plays in the rushing game out of the wazoo. And the question that we had this offseason is, I thought going in that, okay, well, he's an efficient runner. He's going to get more carries. You were on the same wavelength there. The question was, if the efficiency wasn't quite 7.7 yards per carry, what exactly would he do to supplement his production? Because like we said, 27 catches, 197 yards, that's a solid receiving season. That ain't anything to write home about. But we have seen him become a legitimate top-end receiving threat at the running back position. 78 receptions, 592 receiving yards, 6 receiving touchdowns. And as we've seen from the usage, again, I was kind of mocking the usage when we were talking about Tyreek earlier. We've seen a ton of, funnel screens, Texas screens, very creative, innovative screens that Mike McDaniel has added to this team. Again, part of it is because their offensive line is so bad that that's how they need to be supplementing some production. But also part of it is when you have yak threats like Devon Achane and Jonnu Smith on the receiving end of those, it's easy offense. And Mike McDaniel knows if I can get some easy offense, feeding my 4.2 speed, 188-pound playmaker in space, why would I consistently pound him between the tackles behind a bad offensive line when I can just get him in space?
Yeah, and I said week 17. Sorry, I meant week 16 that he had the monster game. Yep. He actually got kind of pulled off the field in week 17 in garbage time, like you said. But yeah, dude, Achane, think about the concerns like some people had about him coming into the year. People were, remember Raheem Mostert, like 33-year-old Raheem Mostert's going to take all of his touches away. It all comes down to this for me for the Miami Dolphins. I think Mike McDaniel will crack the code on how to bring the big plays back, bring the efficiency back, whether that's offensive line upgrades, whether that's scheme, whether that's play calling. I'm still not ready to give up on the offense that, lots of smart football minds, Nate Tice, Dwayne McFarland talked about the advantage of having a Mike McDaniel screen pass versus a regular other team screen pass, having a Mike McDaniel outside zone carry versus another team's carry. That stuff matters. And Devon Achane might come at a sizable discount for what he actually did this year, 17.6 PPR points per game. Again, up over 20 when Tua was on the field. He's a very, very easy pick in the late first round area where he's probably going to go in next year's draft. So for me, that was a nice value at 111.
For sure. Now I'm on the clock here at 112. I'm between 2 rookies here. I don't know which one to take. I still don't realize which direction I'm going to go. Obviously, you guys can put 2 and 2 together. It's between Malik Nabers and it's between Brock Bowers. But I'm looking at it, man. You have a rookie tight end getting 144 targets in 16 games, 108 receptions, nearly 1,200 receiving yards. They could potentially have a quarterback upgrade this offseason. I think it's got to be Brock Bowers, man. When are we ever going to see a redux of a 22-year-old Travis Kelce?
No, you're not going to see it ever again. I don't think. This is that you'd have to give me your firstborn child for this guy in Dynasty right now. I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that in tight end premium formats, he might be a top 5 startup pick.
I agree.
He's that much more valuable than the rest of the tight end position that you could make the argument that you'd rather have him than a Joe Burrow, than a CeeDee Lamb, than a Ja'Marr Chase. depending on the way you like to build teams, maybe you don't want to structurally build out that way. But like as far as trade value, I bet you'd have to give up more in a tight end premium format than you would for CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, or Jahmyr Chase. Like I honestly think you might have to give up more.
Yeah, or at the very least, it would be right on par. Like, Bowers is a fucking monster. And like you said, in relation to the rest of the tight end position, again, McBride, great year this year. But at the same time, Brock Bowers doing what he did as a rookie and being the tight end one in fantasy, you don't see that.
Ever. You do not see that. We would have been lucky, like the way the tight end position works, we would have been lucky to see this season out of Brock Bowers, his third NFL year. If he had done this as a third-year player, we'd be like, holy crap, only 23 years old doing this as a third-year player, 15.5 PPR points per game, leading the position with an 8.9 utilization score. Dude, this is prime Travis Kelce year out of a rookie tight end on one of the worst teams in the NFL.
Yeah, like it's actually freakish. On top of that, you're getting a guy who has 247.7 PPR points in 16 games on 4 touchdowns. We've seen in college, he can score touchdowns. Guess what? You get a quarterback, even average quarterback play in Las Vegas, whether they maybe make the play at JJ McCarthy. I mean, that would actually be a really fun fit too. We were talking about that earlier with New York. Could you imagine if JJ McCarthy went to the Raiders?
That would be really fun. Yeah. I mean, maybe they trade up and make a splash for a quarterback in the draft. Maybe they even if they sign Sam Darnold to a bag or something like that, you're still looking at a much better quarterback than what you had before. Like, this is how crazy good Brock Bowers is. The Raiders from week 4 to week 14 did not win a football game. Didn't win. 10-game losing streak. Brock Bowers averaged 17 PPR points per game in that stretch in regular scoring. You're talking tight end premium formats, forget about it.
It's a wide receiver 1. Yeah, it's a wide receiver 1. And how many wide receivers have gone above him in this board already? Like, I think he's got to be a first-round pick.
Yeah, and like I said, in tight end premium formats, I have him too low, dude. I have him as like a 1-2 turn startup pick. I have him too low. He should be higher.
Yeah, he should. Straight up.
Insanely good. So let's rip through the second round. I do not think we're going to get to the third round based on how long we've gone on this video so far. Let's talk about the second round here. I'm going to try and speed us up a little bit. You talked about a rookie from this year. There is a rookie for next year that needs to come off the board who is not currently off the board. Let's say Ashton Jeanty goes to one of the following landing spots. If he goes to the Cowboys at 13th overall, he'll be long gone by this pick.
Say he's a Raider.
Let's say he's a Raider. Let's say he's a Bengal. Let's say he's a Texan. Let's say he's a Bronco. Let's say he's a Charger. Some of these teams. There's teams here that are better than others for sure. But let's say he got a median projection landing spot. He's a top 20 pick in the NFL draft, and he goes to a team that can use him right away. I'm going to throw in, who do we want to throw in for the memes? Let's say he goes to the Chargers. So we'll throw J.K. Dobbins in for the meme. I'm going to put a picture of Jeanty over it so the comment section doesn't seriously think I'm going to take J.K. Dobbins.
The Chargers are an optimistic playing spot.
Let's just say he goes to the Chargers, for example, or like the Broncos or something. I'm going to put Jeanty's name over this for what it's worth. But Ashton Jeanty is a freakish prospect. By the time I put his junior numbers in, I guarantee he will rank as the best prospect that we've ever seen since 2016 in the FSC prospect model, overtaking Bijan Robinson, overtaking Christian McCaffrey, overtaking Saquon Barkley. He's that good, man. He is that good. And if he gets top 20 draft capital, he's going to have 300 plus touches, 15 plus touchdown type of projection his rookie season, and 80 plus target upside because he's that dude.
By the time you guys are watching this is slated to come out on New Year's Eve. We are actually recording this on the December 31st morning. He plays tonight against Penn State. This is the most rest we have seen for Ashton Jeanty all year. If he goes out there against Penn State, again, really, really strong Penn State defense, and he has 27 carries for 221 yards, 3 touchdowns, and Boise State gets the upset, he is going to be a top 5 pick. I really do think so.
Yeah. Let me just point this out. Like, forget the current draft order because there's still one more game that needs to happen. Would it shock us if Cleveland drafts this guy at 4?
Would not be shocked. That was the landing spot I was pointing to. I think
the Giants draft this guy at 4, or Jacksonville drafts this guy, or Carolina Carolina probably wouldn't draft him, but like, there's teams here that could draft him inside the top 10. And if he goes in that high,
Chicago.
Yeah, like this situation is like crazy to monitor for Ashton Jeanty because he is as good of a prospect as Bijan and Saquon were, who both went in the top 8.
100%. So that was another guy I was thinking about taking. When I mentioned the rookies, there was another one. I'm sure you know exactly what I'm referring to. In fact, you already mentioned his team, but plug Malik Nabers in there. I mean, Malik Nabers. I was talking about this with you offhandedly on a previous live stream. Malik Nabers this year had over 11 targets per game. I believe now week 17, to be fair, only had 8 targets, so it might have went down. But he had, 162 targets in 14 games. What would that be? 11.3 targets per game, give or take? 11.3 targets per game?
The point is, he had insane volume.
Like we're talking about, for reference, Michael Thomas Jr. in his Triple Crown year had about 11.5 targets per game. Cooper Kupp in his Triple Crown year had about 11.7 targets per game. Malik Nabers, with good quarterback play, could break fantasy football. And we're talking about a guy, again, he finally saw some more touchdown equity down the stretch, 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games. But even despite that, dude, he was averaging over 15 points per game on 3 touchdowns down the stretch. And on top of that, we saw what the ceiling was prior to the concussion as well. So with Malik Nabers, I mean, you get a rookie wide receiver that goes out there, posts nearly 1,200 yards, 6 touchdowns in 14 games played. We already talked about Brian Thomas Jr. Again, I would slightly prefer him because I think it's a safer projection, assuming Trevor Lawrence is back. But you could even make the case between Malik Nabers and Brian Thomas Jr., anybody in that 5-pick range kind of being flipped on their heads.
I'm still so mad that in my home league, I almost had Malik Nabers fall to me at 4-11 and he went at the 4-10. I'm still pissed about it because I knew, and you guys heard us all summer, I don't care that Malik Nabers is on a bad team. I do not care Malik Nabers is that good. And guess what happened? 18.1 PPR points per game on the worst quarterback situation in the NFL. It didn't matter who his quarterback was, whether it was Danny Dimes, Tommy DeVito, Drew. Look what happens when he gets reasonable quarterback play. Not even that. I mean, he scored on 2 screen passes, for fuck's sakes, in week 17. He didn't score on bomb touchdowns. He did that all himself.
He's got a chance to be a 1,300-yard wide receiver as a rookie. And we just talked about it, Brian Thomas Jr., how special he's been. He finished the wide receiver 4 across the year. Malik Nabers and Brian Thomas Jr., again, Marvin Harrison Jr. is not going to hear his name called in the second round, but it's almost comical because of how good the rookie wide receivers were this year. Again, we haven't even talked about, guys like Lab McConkey, et cetera, really stepping onto the scene. If you told me coming into the year, oh yeah, Marvin Harrison Jr. would have a down year, and that down year would be about 900 yards and 7 receiving touchdowns, I would have been like, okay, so he had a rookie season. But because of how good these other guys have been, that's why everybody's focused on how bad Marv has been.
Yeah, no, it's insanely impressive what these guys have done, especially, for what it's worth, you give me Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward on the Giants, I would probably take Nabers over Thomas Jr. because I think Nabers is better.
It'd be a combo. I think they're both elite.
They're both exceptionally good receivers, but the reason I think Nabers is better is because we've seen them both on the same field with the same conditions, and Nabers was better.
I mean, hey, we could say the same thing between Justin Jefferson and Jahmyr Chase.
Yeah, no, we could. We could say the same thing.
Appreciate greatness. Both when 2 guys are elite, just let them both be elite. No need to compare.
Go Tigers, man. These guys are built different. Anyways, next up, let's speed through these a little bit faster. Yeah. I think there's a bit of a drop off here as far as what we're looking at. Yeah. You got to kind of jump either to, maybe you want to go with Trey McBride if you want to get a tight end advantage. Maybe you want to go down into the mid RB1 range to try and grab a guy there. Maybe you want to tear down a little bit at wide receiver or whatever. I'm going to make a splash because I want to start a combo. And I just talked about the Miami Dolphins being a team that should be better than people think. There's also, for what it's worth, we have not mentioned the guy who was going consensus 101 in all home league drafts last year, which was Christian McCaffrey. And I don't know what to do with CMC right now, to be honest. I really don't. But would it shock me if come August, he was a mid-first rounder again or a late first rounder again? No, it wouldn't shock me because he's Christian McCaffrey. And I think Derrick Henry and some of these guys have taught us that some players are just simply built different. And if Christian McCaffrey is 100% healthy next year on the 49ers, they project a lot better than the 6-10 football team or whatever they are right now. I think you could make the argument that McCaffrey belongs here. I am going to take Tyreek Hill because you talked about it with CeeDee Lamb. What happened 2 years ago to me is still very, very relevant. And not only 2 years ago, for 6 or 7 years before that, I get that Tyreek Hill is old. I get that he has injury concerns. I get that he has age concerns. Maybe he's lost a step. Whatever we want to say here, I'm sure by the time we get to August, we'll know more answers on how severe his injuries were that he was playing through this year. We got reports that he was playing through a broken hand. Of course, Tua being out for a large majority of the year was a big time problem for this offense. When Tua was on the field, he was a lot better, naturally, but the big plays weren't there. We saw week 1 against Jacksonville. They had a monster bomb touchdown. I don't think they had another one for the rest of the year, the Miami Dolphins, whether that was Waddle or Tyreek. My thing on Miami is that Mike McDaniel is going to slave and sweat over every single reason why they couldn't score a long bomb touchdown all off season long. And he's going to come up in September next year with a huge new bag of tricks. And they're going to have Tyreek Hill playing at a high level, Devon Achane playing at a high level, Jalen Waddle playing at a high level. I guess what I'm trying to say with this Dolphins offense in general is that they could be the skeleton key lightning in a bottle offense that you need next year. And they might be underpriced because of what happened this year. And I'm not really all that worried about Tua's injury history because you can't predict a concussion. It happens on freakish plays. If it happens again, it happens again. And that sucks. And maybe that's a factor why you wouldn't want to take Tyreek, because we've seen what the floor is now. But there's a reason that this guy was literally an MVP candidate in 2023, Tyreek Hill. He was a 25 point per game scorer the first 11 to 12 weeks of 2023.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this is a little bit early for me knowing the risk level, knowing that, again, I understand there is context. However, anytime I see an older wide receiver show declines in particular, there's just a couple other projections that I feel a lot better about. So again, late second, you can get me on board. Early second is a little bit too steep for my blood, because the guy that I'm going to be taking here, and it's funny because you talked about the Miami Dolphin last year that we were all over was Devon Achane, and this year's Devon Achane is Bucky Irving. And it's funny because he's on your favorite team. But let's just talk about how fucking impressive Bucky Irving was down the stretch this year. So on the season, this is actually tweeted out by our buddy Sal Vetri, right? Bucky Irving on the season, 1,430 total yards from scrimmage on 44% of the snaps. Over 1,400 total yards on 44% of the snaps across the year. And if you isolate out, okay, so week 6 on, if you isolate out the game that he left early, I believe 4 carries for 3 yards against Las Vegas, left early in that game. If you isolate out that game since week 6, 18.31 PPR points per game. Bucky Irving in a split backfield with Rachaad White taking a good amount of work was legitimately an RB1 in fantasy down the stretch. Now you're getting a situation where, like, I mean, you've been vocal about the situation for Liam Cohen. You think he's either going to be back as OC or you guys are going to promote him to head coach, right?
Yeah, I would venture a guess to say that the Glazers behind the scenes will write a blank check. This is what you're going to make as an offensive coordinator. And Todd Bowles wants to retire a year from now, 2 years from now, and you will be our next in line, because that's exactly what happened with Todd Bowles. That's precisely what we did. Bruce Arians wanted to retire. People were wanting to hire Todd Bowles as a head coach away from Tampa Bay, and they told him, "You're going to take over this team in like 2 years." Todd Bowles is 63 years old, man. They're gonna like groom Liam Cohen to take over this job. Maybe he gets an offer he can't refuse. The Dallas Cowboys, the Chicago Bears offer him a massive contract. Whoever wants Liam Cohen, maybe he could be gone, but I tend to think he's going to stay.
Your guys' offensive line has been playing a lot better this year. Obviously, shout out Carberry teaching that offensive line. A lot of recent draft picks. Graham Barton. Every time I see this guy on my screen, pulling center, absolutely fucking flattening kids out. Like,
he's been the worst of all of them too. That's the crazy part is of the offensive linemen we have, he's actually been the worst this year.
Which is insane to me because of how good he's been every time I watch that guy play. Your offensive line
he's been a splash play, but not consistent kind of offensive lineman this year.
Fair. Like, even in the Cowboys game, like some of the pulls that he can make, like the guy is just so mobile at that size. So
yeah,
your offensive line going from a liability to a strength this year, I think has been the big proponent, and you guys taking the step up as an offense. Because obviously, again, Baker Mayfield's going to do his team. They're always going to have the threat of the passing game. But you guys being able to establish the run and get those splash plays in the run game from Bucky Irving has really transformed your offense. So I'm excited to see what he looks like in year 2. It's just kind of goes to show you that maybe we should keep paying less and less stock into the combine, because this is a guy that we thought would be a 4.3 runner, ran like a 4.45 at the combine. And everybody questioned his long speed. I'll tell you right now, from his game film this year, no questions about that long speed.
Yeah, I think he actually ran in the 4.5s.
4.5s, correction.
Yeah, it was not a good testing performance from him. And Kyron also, maybe we'll hear his name called before this. I'm not exactly sure if we're going to call his name, but Yeah, Bucky and the offense. I mean, we didn't even see Bucky Irving and Chris Godwin's runs coincide really with each other. Godwin was the dude the first 6 weeks of this offense. He goes down, and then we kind of shifted focus to the run game. Imagine what these guys can do, both of them, when they're both healthy and the offense is operating at a full capacity with hopefully Liam Cohen doesn't go anywhere. I say that not just as copium too. The Bucks beat reporters, Pewter Reports, Scott Reynolds, and some of the guys there, they've been very vocal that they are not going to let Liam Cohen go. Like they are pretty positive that the Glazers are going to do something very rewarding to make Liam stay. Because I wouldn't just be saying that with just,
straight up.
Yeah, we should. You don't let a 30-something-year-old head coaching candidate walk out of your building when your coach is in his mid-60s. Like, you don't.
Well, straight up, it would be as if Sean McVay was 60 years old and they let Kevin O'Connell walk out that building. Like, Sean McVay being in his prime, obviously at that point, wish O'Connell well, safe travels, good luck in Minnesota, because you have Sean McVay, who's already an elite coach. But if Sean McVay was 60 years old, I can tell you right now, the Rams would have done anything in their power to keep Kevin O'Connell when they did.
Yeah, and we're also, like, how many times have we kept good players? Like, everyone, Tristan Wirfs hitting the market, never. Antoine Winfield hitting the market, never. Mike Evans hitting the market,
Vita Vea for a fourth.
Levante David hitting the market, never. Like, we always keep our guys. That's how Jason Light rolls. So, speaking of, the NFC South, there's other guys that factor in here. I think Mike Evans, Drake London could definitely come into play here. I think Christian McCaffrey's got to come off the board, man. Like, I don't know what to do with Christian McCaffrey, but I feel like he should just be gone right now, because where are home leagues going to take Christian McCaffrey? Like, they're going to take him higher than this, right?
I don't know. I think there's one guy, specifically a vet running back. I think you have to take Derrick Henry over him at this point, personally. But
I'm taking McCaffrey. And here's why. Yeah. Again.
Fair. Okay.
McCaffrey objectively wasn't good this year when he was on the field. He was coming back from a major injury. He was dealing with this Achilles tendonitis, all this nonsense. But here's the good news. He didn't suffer a severe re-injury of the Achilles tendonitis. He obviously got shut down for the year and, all that stuff. But Christian McCaffrey is Christian McCaffrey, man. And precisely the reason we ended up looking stupid this year on Derrick Henry is because Derrick Henry is Derrick Henry. And the 49ers had literally everything go wrong for them this year. Every single thing that could have possibly went wrong. Brock Purdy is going to get a bag in the offseason. Maybe one of Debo or Kittle or somebody is expendable, but that's why you drafted Ricky Pearsall. He looked pretty good last night. He's got a chance to get better. Jawan Jennings maybe is expendable because he might hit free agency and get a lot of money from another team or whatever. There's a lot of things that are up in the air with San Francisco. What I do know is, like the Miami Dolphins, I trust Kyle Shanahan to figure things out. And if Christian McCaffrey is healthy, there is a reason everybody was taking him 101, despite his age, despite his concern. And what did we say? This was the first year that we were like, I don't care about Christian McCaffrey's age. I really don't, because he has 120 target upside in an offense that should be a lot better next year than they were this year.
Speaking of don't care about the age, this has to be the Derrick Henry spot. Like, yeah. I get it. There's concern. He only had 20 targets this year. Yabba. 30 years old, 247-pound running back. Risk level. I don't care. The guy just went out there in Baltimore on a top 2 offense in the league, averaged nearly 6 yards per carry, and ran for over 1,700 yards. There is risk. Don't get me wrong. A 31-year-old running back that doesn't catch passes, maybe sees an efficiency decline. I get it. I've made that fucking case against him.
We've been saying this for 4 years about Derrick Henry.
Like, dude, and maybe it's inevitable that this is the year that we finally believe back on him, that all of the concerns are validated like McCaffrey this year. I'm taking the risk. At the same time, like, we've seen this guy have stretches of being a legitimate game changer in fantasy. The RB4 this year, there's already going to be people in the comments saying, hey, Derrick Henry, he went in the mid-second of your draft. That is way too low. And you're probably right. It probably is way too low. But this is the fucking floor of his spot, to be honest. For us being Derrick Henry haters, I can't go lower than this. This has to be the spot for him.
Yeah, and if you wanted to take him over Bowers at 112, that's fine with me.
Yeah,
that would be the highest I would take him. But there's a pretty relatively fluid range here. So if you don't feel comfortable projecting Jeanty yet because we have no idea where he's going to go and all that kind of stuff, that's fine. You want to take Henry over him? That's cool. Bucky Irving, undersized, we're a little bit concerned there. Fine. Yeah. Christian McCaffrey dealt with injuries last year. To me, they're the exact same argument. So if you think Derrick Henry should go higher, then Christian McCaffrey should go even higher, because Christian McCaffrey is objectively a better fantasy projection because he catches the ball.
Yeah, like, obviously they both have their concerns. It would be
the same argument, though. Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey, precisely the exact same concern.
Yeah, I mean, I feel better about Baltimore's offensive projection just based off what we've seen this year, because I do think there is a little bit more risk in San Francisco now. But I mean, you're arguing two guys that can break fantasy or two guys that can flounder up.
Yeah, and they're both going to put on a gold jacket someday. So
Yeah.
I think that the talent argument is negligible as well. So,
Great.
yeah, this is going to be probably just a run of running backs, I guess, because I'm probably going to go with another one here. There's a couple guys that factor in. Part of me wants to copia my way into saying Breece Hall needs to be this high because Breece Hall was taken very highly in drafts this year. I still believe that the guy who came off of a torn ACL last year with Zach freaking Wilson, Tim Boyle, and all these other guys as his quarterback, finishes a top 5 running back. The vibes were so bad in New York, and I have no hope that they're going to get better right now. So that's why I can't take Breece Hall yet.
Agreed.
But if the Jets move on from Aaron Rodgers, the experience, they wipe their hands with it, bye-bye, go do your ayahuasca, retreats, and they get a young rookie quarterback in the draft, or they, sign a veteran quarterback or whatever they do, and the vibes are much better, and Breece Hall's got the same exact projection he had last year. There was a reason that I said Breece Hall was the absolute safest pick in fantasy in the first round, because he really was at the time. And the offense just floundered like crazy. They get the right coach, they get the right quarterback in there. I do think that he has a lot of upside still, because I still think he's one of the best running backs in the league who had a down season this year. So Breece Hall, want to mention that he potentially could find his way in here. But Josh Jacobs is just a steady horse, man. And he's on a really good team that knows how to run the ball and will know how to run the ball. Maybe people are more concerned next year about Marshawn Lloyd or whoever else. But I mean, me and you were hammering Josh Jacobs in the 3rd and 4th round of best ball last year. And I think the market's going to correct to that and put him in the 2nd round.
I mean, we argued last year he should have been a back-end 2nd round pick, and that ended up coming exactly to fruition. In fact, you can even make the case in the late 2nd, he finished as a top 6 overall running back. That was a value in its own right. Now, I do have a little bit more concerns offensively with how the Green Bay passing offense has deteriorated down the stretch. However, you can also argue that in the inverse. When the Green Bay offense could not throw the football, who was the guy that was scoring over 22 points per game down the stretch? It was Josh Jacobs. Now, obviously, if you guys have a bitter taste in your mouth about week 16, he gets benched at halftime because they're mollywopping the Saints and you lost your semifinal because of him, because of that. Like, I can see people fading Josh Jacobs down a little bit even further than this because of that sour taste in their mouth. However, we don't focus about sour taste. We focus about projection. And with Josh Jacobs, you're getting a workhorse physical between the tackles runner for Matt LaFleur. So I think that is the proper spot for him. And speaking of proper spot, if we are under the assumption right now that Cincinnati needs to fix their defense, Cincinnati needs to grab a receiver, Cincinnati has too many holes on their roster to take a running back in the first 3 rounds, Chase Brown has to find his way right here. Chase Brown, despite not becoming the full-time starter until week 9, ran for 990 rushing yards, 380 receiving yards, 65 targets. We're talking about a guy that had, 294 opportunities, and he wasn't the full-time starter until week 9. We are talking one of the biggest workhorses down the stretch since week 9. 32 opportunities, 24 opportunities, 29 opportunities, 15, 22, 28, 21, 24. Absolute workhorse. We know he's an explosive runner. We know he got goal line equity at the end of the year. We know that he's good as a receiver. Sure, could they draft in round 4 an Ollie Gordon to take some of those dirty carries? And I'm factoring that in here, because if you told me that he entered next season as the sole back on this team, he would find his way higher in this draft. But at the same time, even if they add a 4th round, 5th round runner, again, maybe you add a Ollie Gordon, Hassan Haskins, a Khalil Mullings, a physical power runner to that team, Chase Brown is too good, attached to too good of an offense to draft any lower than this.
Yeah, 20.9 PPR points since week 9 when he took over the job. It's really hard to poke holes in Chase Brown. Again, maybe the Bengals offense is not quite as good as they were this year down the stretch, but it's a nails projection, man. It's an absolutely nails projection. If he is the starting running back, and again, we're way too early on this draft. Like this could look dumb. This could look smart. I tend to think that the vibes that you have off of the previous season end up being just as accurate sometimes as when we're drafting in August and we have more information, because people copium their way back into players who weren't good. And that's why, you sometimes get busts. And maybe that's, something to be said about my Tyreek Hill pick, for example, or my Christian McCaffrey pick. So there's a number of guys that we could still go with. I think it is probably absurd that AJ Brown is still on the board. I think we probably
that was the other consideration.
We probably should have taken him earlier than this. And in hindsight, maybe you'd go with him over like a Christian McCaffrey or even a Tyreek.
There's one other receiver I might rank over him still.
If I had to do it over, I think I might have taken him over Tyreek, to be honest, as the next receiver off the board. But regardless, I mean, AJ Brown, the concern is that the pass volume of this offense, it funnels through Saquon Barkley, and they want to run the ball like crazy. And AJ Brown, last time we had this type of concern about him was a 2-3 turn pick. So that's kind of what you have to think about with AJ Brown. But who knows, man? Things change in the NFL. Sometimes the way you run hot or run pure, if you're AJ Brown, is like the Eagles secondary gets banged up next year or something, and they have to pass the ball a lot more as a result. And that's why AJ Brown's way better than this pick or whatever. But as currently constructed, I do believe that AJ Brown probably belongs more so in the early-ish second round as opposed to the first round.
See, yeah, I think he has to be a second rounder, and I do think anywhere in the mid-second portions about where the value is. Now, I do like the running back projections over him. The reason being, even with the context, obviously we know he's an alpha target earner, but we also have to factor in Goddard missed some time this year. Devontae Smith missed some time this year. He averaged 16.8 PPR points per game, with Jalen Hurts only missing one game. So it's like, I love AJ Brown. I think he's a superstar level wide receiver, but I also think the offensive volume really limits to what his ceiling can be in fantasy. Can he be a legitimate 20, 21, 22 point per game scorer like all the other wide receivers ahead of him can? I don't necessarily think so. Again, I think he's a safe projection to finish in that mid to back end wide receiver one territory. But gun to my head right now, can he finish above Nico Collins, Puka Nacua, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra, Jefferson, Chase? I don't think so.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely a fair concern, a valid concern to raise. There's still like so many more guys I feel like belong in the second round. There's only a couple that we're going to actually be able to put in here. It's your pick, but like I just want to highlight really quick that I think there's a number of running backs that could still go here. Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon. You could talk me into Kyron Williams for sure. You could talk about even Chuba Hubbard, man. Like Jonathan Brooks is probably gonna miss the whole year next year. Like you could talk me into Hubbard right here if you wanted to. But there's also still Trey McBride on the board. You could maybe factor in the quarterbacks at this point as well. Where are you leaning here with the 210?
Yeah, all of that sounds good, but there's one other wide receiver that needs to hear his name called here. And people pretty much refer to him as the point per game guy because he never finishes a full season. But if you did have him at the end of the season, you're most likely holding up your fantasy football championship. I'm talking about T. Higgins. T. Higgins, let's talk about the scenario he's back in Cincy, where he averaged 19.3 PPR points per game and legitimately won people championships, like I said, with a 40-point outing in week 17. Or let's talk about a scenario he hits free agency. He signs a deal worth $30 to $32 million per year. He's in New England. Think of all the cap space teams, and he becomes a number one wide receiver. Regardless of whether scenario that is, I think late second round is a very good value for him. Because if he's in Cincinnati, like you mentioned, the tetherment to Joe Burrow, 40-plus touchdown projection like he had this year. I understand the injury concerns are always going to be valid with T. Higgins. But when this guy is on the field, he is a fantasy football wide receiver one. And because of the injury discount every single year, he always finds himself in round 3 and round 4.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I had T. Higgins in 3 of my 4 title games, and I won all 3 of them. So I feel pretty good about that. Actually, sorry, I didn't have him in tone setters. I had him in 2 of my 4, and I won both of the ones that I had him in. He was awesome every time he was on the field this year. It's really hard to argue anything against T. Higgins, even if he's back in Cincinnati and we have to worry about Ja'Marr Chase taking away volume and all this crap that we always worry about with T. Higgins and the injuries and all this stuff. Part of, I think, some of the injury concern this year was that like he knew if I miss a significant period of time, I'm not getting nearly the contract I want to get. No. I think he was very, very cautious with both of the injuries he was dealing with this year. So that could have factored in. He might have played 14, 15 games if he was just playing through injury like he normally does. So that's something that people are going to have to factor in, obviously. But once he gets a big contract, that might be less of an issue. Yeah,
heck, if he's Drake May's wide receiver one next year, you could argue late second's too low.
Yeah, for sure. So again, I named a million guys that I could go with at this point in time. I think I'm going to lean away from the wide receiver position. I think just generally speaking, the way that the honeypots of the draft are going to work out this year, just given what we saw last year, usually impacts what we're going to see the following year. we saw so many good running back plays. I think that the second and third round will be littered with running backs. We're going to see 15 go in the second and third round for the most part.
I would make the case that neither a running back or wide receiver should go here.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to take McBride here, you want to take Lamar here, you want to take Josh Allen here, I think all of those guys would definitely make some sense. You know what? I'll agree with you. I really want to take Breece Hall here. I'll tell you that for free.
I really want to take over McBride.
I really want to take Breece Hall here. I'm not taking McBride. I'm taking Josh Allen. Because Josh Allen's an absolute freak show, and he belongs to go in the second round.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly reasonable. Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. I mean, obviously, we've talked about in depth about how this is probably the best quarterback MVP cases like beside each other and how long. And we're talking about Joe Burrow being the third in MVP voting in a year he's going to throw 45 touchdowns. Special quarterback play in the NFL. And it's just hilarious because if you recall early in the season, can you remember people talking about, oh, what happened to quarterback play? I miss the days of the Rodgers, the Manning, and the Brady, and the Breeze.
It was the first 2 or 3 games of the year. We had only good running back production games, and like everybody at wide receiver, quarterback, and tight end was terrible.
Yeah. And now we got Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson being 25-point per game scorers at quarterback.
Yep. That's how it goes in the NFL, man. As soon as you think you got things figured out, it always rears its head. So are you going to close this out with McBride here?
Yeah, it's between McBride, Lamar. I'm between a couple guys. So I'll give you guys the full rundown of who would be in contention here. I think we already mentioned T. Higgins, so he's off the board. It would be between one of the onesies with Lamar and McBride, or you could convince me if you wanted to go the direction of like a Drake London, somebody like that. Again, I'm not going to go that direction, but you could convince me. If Josh Allen's finding his way in the second round here, I'm going to end it off with Lamar Jackson. And then if I was at this turn, would take Trey McBride at the next pick. So that's how I'd play it. If you're at the 101 here, you get Jahmyr, you get Lamar. Jahmyr and Lamar, obviously, you can even make your fantasy team name off of that, shout out there. And then you pair that up with Trey McBride. It's pretty simple. Everything that you said about Josh Allen, these two are the MVP favorites for a reason. Lamar Jackson has, 410 fantasy points on the year. The highest amount he's had in a season since his 2019 MVP season. This is by far his best passing season in the NFL. This is by far his best passing personnel. You're looking at Zay Flowers stepping into his zone. You're looking at the 2 tight ends. You're looking at Rashad Bateman really coming into his own as well. Having the threat of Derrick Henry as well has really helped the efficiency of this passing game. There are no holes in Lamar Jackson's game. And I really do feel like the return of the high quarterback needs to be coming because, again, I'm assuming in the round 3, round 4 area, Jaden Daniels and Jalen Hurts would find their way off the board here. And I really do feel like given how much of an advantage a high-end quarterback one has proven this year, these guys should be going high.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you. Let's have some fun here, Danny. Let's go pick by pick, no analysis, third round. Let's do it. Okay, I'm taking, you mentioned Trey McBride. Let's roll with McBride here at the 301.
Drake London.
Drake London, you want to go with here? Okay, let's do it. We're just so we can show the full third round to you guys, we're going to do it like this. 303 would be my pick. I'm going to go with Breece Hall, who I talked about already.
Yeah, and then I would probably take Lab McConkey here.
Yeah, I think McConkey definitely deserves to be a shout here. I mean, you have 1,000 yards as a rookie. You're attached to Justin Herbert. They actually are a top 6 pass rate over expectation team since their bye. So maybe that's a sign of things to come. They're going to let Justin Herbert uncork it a little bit more. Maybe they add a running back in the draft. Maybe they keep Dobbins. Maybe they add more receivers. We don't really know at this point in time, but what we do know is McConkey had basically a second half Amon-Ra St. Brown type of rookie season, man. He was really, really good. And a lot of you guys probably won championships based on what he did in week 17 as well.
For sure. So I think that would be off the board there. You would be back.
I'm back up on the clock here. I think this is probably a running back pick between Jonathan Taylor, Kyron Williams, James Cook, and Joe Mixon. I think those would be the names that you'd factor in. Again, maybe you want to factor in a Alvin Kamara, who had a great season, obviously, too. I'm going to go with Kyron. I like the workload. I like the offense. I'll go with Kyron Williams there.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick. I already took Drake London, so I'd probably Jonathan Taylor here. Again, no much more analysis, so let's just do that.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that Taylor wasn't really much of an advantage until the 2 fantasy playoff weeks, week 16 and 17. He was more of an RB2 projection. Again, hopefully Richardson takes a step forward. We don't exactly know what's going to happen there, but Taylor being a third round pick feels right to me. I don't think he should go really any higher than that. I think name value, maybe people will put him up a little bit higher, but I think this is about the range that he belongs. I'm back on the clock here, running back or wide receiver again, like probably going to go running back here. I'll go with James Cook. I think he's a rock solid projection. Buffalo Bills offense, starting running back, not quite the workload of the other guys, which is why he would go a little lower for me, but still a good projection.
Full PPR league, JSN finds his way next.
Okay, JSN. We're going to go with the next pick, like you said. JSN, where are you? JSN. Okay, so next up, I could go with a number of different guys here. Chris Godwin's going to be healthy to start the year, man. And I cannot, in good faith as a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, take Mike Evans over Chris Godwin with how Chris Godwin was performing. There's things up in the air, dislocated ankle, tough injury potentially. Then you also have the fact that he's actually not under contract and he could hit free agency. But what did I just say about Bucky Irving and Liam Cohen earlier in the video? We don't let our guys go, man. Chris Godwin is the second all-time leading receiver in the history of this franchise, only behind Mike Evans. So they are not going to let him go. And they're going to get him for maybe a little bit cheaper now because of the injury. So for me, I'm going Chris Godwin here because he was literally, other than T. Higgins, who's currently the wide receiver 2 in points per game, Chris Godwin was right there with him as like the only other non-Jahmyr Chase 19-plus PPR point per game scorer.
Plugging Garrett Wilson for me next.
Yeah, and again, he very similar to Breece Hall. This is like a bad vibes pick where if the vibes were better and we have more certainty about the quarterback position, like let's say we get a good quarterback going to the Jets, whatever that means, it's a better situation. Wilson goes as high as how high? How high does Wilson go? 2-3 turn?
Probably where T. Higgins went.
Yeah, give or take 2-3 turn. I think Hall is best case scenario, probably an early to mid second if we have good vibes about the team. So that's kind of where we're thinking with the Jets. We can look back on this closer to the season and see how close or how far we were. Running back wise, Pacheco is interesting because I do think Pacheco is going to have like a really poor run out to the rest of the season. He's still banged up. He's not playing at a high level. Kareem Hunt is still there.
Third feels rich.
It's rich, but I do think he's going to end up being a good value next year. I think we have a chance that he's like a 5th round pick or something, and we're just getting him at a super good value in the dead zone or whatever. But I'm going to go back to the wideout position. I think this is, I'll just roll with Mike Evans here. I think Mike Evans belongs to go this high.
Yeah, I think that's solid. And then the final pick here would probably be between, again, we could say, oh yeah, we would take Ted McMillan here. Now we don't know exactly the landing spot. He's probably going to be more of a 4th round pick if I were to guess right now. So I'm not going to go the Ted McMillan route, but I do think he would be in consideration here.
Hampton too, potentially.
Hampton, yeah. Caleb Johnson goes like top 40. I think all those guys could find their way in this area. But I do think that this is where, do I want to take Jalen Hurts or Jaden Daniels? Is kind of where I'm at.
For what it's worth, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that Terry McLaurin should probably be in this as well.
Yeah.
He's definitely had a great season. Year 2, Jaden Daniels, like you could definitely make the argument he belongs this high. George Pickens had a monster year this year. If he has Russell Wilson back again, I do think it's possible he has a great 2025 season as well. And like, I mean, if you believe in Harrison to bounce back, he could probably work his way in here. Devontae Adams, we'll see what happens with him, where he's playing. Chris Olave, same thing. There's a number of guys that we could still mention here.
Give me Jaden Daniels here. Give me Jaden Daniels.
Jaden Daniels over Jalen Hurts, eh?
I do think so, because I'm looking at the comparison of both their years. Jaden Daniels outscored him on a point per game basis. Jaden Daniels looked a lot more comfortable as a passer. And Jaden Daniels, I mean, they add another stud wide receiver to this core. Again, we know Terry McLaurin's there. If they go out there and they draft like a Trey Harris or a Burden or someone like that, it's hard not to love the projection of Jaden Daniels. Again, we were lower on him in the pre-draft cycle. There's nothing for me to be low about at this point. Like he is everything that he was built to be by the supporters.
Yeah, and we were too low on the guy, clearly.
Yeah,
like we'll eat crow on some of these guys. Like some of these guys, like Derrick Henry, Jaden Daniels, we were just objectively wrong about, and we need to rectify that. So yeah, Jaden Daniels, I think, is a good closeout. Like I said, I think McLaurin factors in. I think Pickens would factor in. We talked about Hampton and Caleb Johnson and Ted McMillan.
Hurts, obviously.
I mean, we get word that Travis Hunter is going to play wide receiver full time. He would factor in here. Maybe you get a great landing spot.
James Conner.
Yeah, James Conner also factored. I don't think I would put James Conner this high, to be honest, but
the market would, though.
I don't think so, man. I don't think so. Not at least not in best ball. Maybe in redraft leagues they might, but
Chuba.
Yeah, Chuba Hubbard probably should be off the board already, to be honest. I actually would probably, you know what, I'm going to change my pick from Mike Evans to Chuba Hubbard because I think Hubbard should be off the board.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. And again, maybe he does go a little bit earlier in your guys' mocks. Again, the 3rd round we just kind of did off the cuff. So if he was a guy that you guys would have taken earlier, don't.
Yeah, Kamara too. I mean, for what it's worth, probably belongs here. With how good Kamara has been, he probably belongs as a 3rd, 4th round pick. It's so funny to me because like I have this sinking feeling that okay, we were all stupid to fade all of these old running backs this year. And I'm not saying us necessarily, because in best ball, we got our shares of these guys, but the market was stupid to not like Joe Mixon this year, or to not like Josh Jacobs this year, to not like Alvin Kamara this year. Next year, would it shock me if we're like, oh yeah, that's why we don't draft old running backs? Like, it wouldn't shock me if we overcorrect to a point that Kamara and those guys are going too high as opposed to too low. So, but I have faith that the best ball sickos will balance out the running back age apex stuff. That even Alvin Kamara could have been the RB1 in fantasy this year. He still would have been a 5th or a 6th round pick on Underdog. So I have a lot of faith that only home leagues will overreact to it.
Am I crazy to say that this is arguably one of the best feeling top 3 rounds that I've felt in a while?
We say that every year, though. There's going to be stuff that comes up. A couple of these guys will get nuked by new rookies. A couple of these guys will deal with injuries in training camp. Like there's going to be stuff that comes up for sure. But let us know how we did. Again, let us know down below. Who are we just way too low? And I'm sure Derrick Henry is going to get some comments. Maybe Christian McCaffrey as well. Jacobs potentially could get some comments. I think AJ Brown personally is too low in this as well. If I had to do it again, I would take him higher. Let us know what you guys think in the comment section. I'm a little bit more bullish on some of these teams here, like the Dolphins bouncing back, the 49ers potentially bouncing back here. We didn't talk about Ayuk either, but given the injuries, probably not going to be ready for week 1, or at least not quite 100% by week 1. But yeah, a lot of guys that we talked about. What's up?
Even like a Devontae Adams, you can make the argument could have been in here.
Yeah, for sure. He had a great season at the end of the year there with the Jets. But yeah, that is the end of this. This was a way too early look at the 2025 redraft, mock draft here. If you guys enjoy the video, leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you guys are Dynasty players, or maybe you've never played Dynasty and you want to start playing Dynasty, head on over to flockfantasy.com. We're going to have tons of Dynasty content. Both the Dynasty Land and the Dynasty Domain guys already have their first editions of their rookie draft guides out. Me and Danny, obviously, we watch like 5 games, all 22 on these guys. So ours won't be out until like February. But at the same time, you're going to get a lot of value over on the site to begin with. Our trade value charts going through a big update as the season closes out and all that good stuff. So if you guys are interested in Dynasty or curious about Dynasty, head on over to the site. You can get team reviews from us over there as well. If you guys do Dynasty startups in the month of January, I know that's a big time month that a lot of people are doing startups. So definitely check out all of that stuff, and make sure to check out Underdog as well. That is all linked down below in the pinned comment and in the description. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.